I'd like to discuss an interesting conversation that took place this past Easter Sunday. You may be aware, you probably are aware, of Richard Dawkins, the biologist, the Oxford professor, who rose to some significant degree of prominence in recent decades as he became identified with what's often called the new atheist movement. What Dawkins has spent, as you probably know, much of his life attacking Christian beliefs. But as our culture as a whole becomes increasingly hostile to Christianity, Dawkins is stepping back. He doesn't like what he's seeing.
Choose between Christianity and Islam. I choose Christianity every single time. I find that I like to live in a culturally Christian country, although I do not believe a single word of the Christian faith.
All right, he doesn't believe a word of the Christian faith, but he would rather live in a Christian country than any other country anytime. That, of course, was Dawkins. That was this past Sunday during an interview with UK-based LBC, which is leading Britain's conversation. But for centuries, Christians and biblical values have blessed our culture, both for Christians and non-Christians. That's the point. Things like service, like compassion, honesty, respect for authority, respect for one another. The list goes on and on and on. And as these Christian values are attacked, even those who are hostile to the Christian faith don't like the alternatives that are coming. Well, joining me now to discuss this is William Federer. He's the president of Amerisearch. He's the host of the American Minute and Faith and History. He's the author of many, many books, including America's God and Country Encyclopedia of Quotations. Bill, welcome to Washington Watch. Great to see you again.
Jody, great to be with you.
All right. Are you at all surprised by a famous atheist like Richard Dawkins coming out with these kind of remarks and that he really feels this way?
Well, I think he's seeing the logical conclusion of the path of deconstructing a society. The most common form of government is gangs, and it's a hierarchical structure where if you're friends with the gang leader or the king, you're worth more. If you're not their friend, you're worth less. If you're their enemy, you're a slave or you're dead. And then the alternative is to take the power of a king and give it to the people. But unless the people have morals and virtue, it turns into chaos. And out of that chaos, they want a king again. So it's just keep going around the circle, so to speak. And so when you look at history, the first instance of a nation without a king was ancient Israel. And it worked for 400 years without a king because everybody was taught the law and they were personally accountable to God and follow it. Well, what happened with ancient Israel? The priests stopped teaching the law and every man did what was right in their own eyes. And you had Eli, the high priest, his own sons are sleeping with women in the tent where the Ark of the Covenant is, and another Levite with a silver graven image, and then another Levite with a concubine, and they're traveling in the houses surrounded by sodomites, and the poor girl's raped to death. And by the time you're grossed out with the story, you read this line, every man did that which was right in their own eyes. And it turns into this lawless chaos that they all go to Samuel the prophet and they say the self-government system's not working. We want to be like the other countries. We want a king. And so America, we looked to this first 400-year period as the model. It was the Hebrew Republic. That's why they taught Hebrew at Yale and Harvard. So we were a country set up with this self-restraint. But as we move in the direction of having fewer morals, it turns into more chaos. And out of that chaos, you're reverting back to a gang style of government. And so I think Dawkins is seeing the logical end of the years of tearing down a Judeo-Christian culture. It's just going to turn into lawlessness. And out of that lawlessness, power is going to reconcentrate in many areas of the country to Islam, but others to communism, to some authoritarian type of structure.
That is a powerful description of the history of it all. And it's absolutely true. I mean, we were established on limited government in this country. But that is impossible. And our founders told us this, as no one knows any better than you. In fact, you largely helped teach me so many of these beliefs that I hold these days. But it's impossible to have limited government without people who are self-governing and capable of self-governing with an authentic understanding of right and wrong. And for that reason, our founders said things like religion and morality are indispensable supports. You cannot have limited government without self-governing, authentic right and wrong that comes from religion and morality. And I think that is what someone like Richard Dawkins is talking about when he says he would choose Christianity over Islam or some of these others any day of the week. It certainly appears as though he understands, at least he may not be able to articulate, but he understands there's a difference, that a Christian-based culture is much better than a culture that is hostile to Christianity and that tears down those Christian institutions. Are we barking up the right tree here?
Well, I think you're making some excellent observations. You know, one of the studies that I like is J.D. Unwin. He was an Oxford anthropologist, and he wrote a book in 1934 called Sex and Culture. And he observed 80 major civilizations over 5,000 years of history, and he found some trends. And the trends were sexual promiscuity always precedes the collapse of a civilization. And he said civilizations go through life cycles, like a plant goes from a seedling to a full-grown plant, mature, and then it ends up getting worm-eaten, an insect, and it dies. And so civilizations go through 4 stages. First is a period of pain and poverty. They make it through a war or a famine, and they work hard, and they become productive. And then they work together, and they become patriotic. And then they become prosperous. And then they want to enjoy their prosperity, and they become promiscuous and less disciplined. Sort of like an athlete. When he's young, he's focused and disciplined, and he wants that championship and exercises. And then finally he gets it, and he's the champ for a couple seasons. And then he gets lazy and indulgent and eats fatty foods and couch potato. And in his mind, he still thinks he's the champ. But he gets challenged into the ring of competition, and he gets the tar knocked out of him. And so this is what happens. But he noticed that sexual promiscuity always precedes the collapse of a civilization. So that's why we're faced with this challenge of trying to bring back a internal moral compass, because without it, all you have is selfish human passion that turns into this lawlessness out of which people will want a strong government to restore order, and you're back to a dictator.
Wow, what a powerful word picture. You know, let's go back to that second part there of the blessing, the prosperity, that part. You have long studied how Christian values have benefited America, that those Christian values have led to God's blessings upon our country. Can you share with us a little bit about that, some of the blessings that we have, just by way of a reminder? I think it's always good for us to be reminded that when we held on to those Christian values, that it was beneficial for everyone. Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, one of the studies I did was go back and research every single century of recorded human history to find out what the most common form of government is. And you have Nimrod and pharaohs and Caesars and Kaisers and sultans and czars, and it's kings, top down. And with military advancements, they can kill more people. And with technological advancements, they can track more people. And until finally, the King of England had the biggest. The sun never set on the British Empire. He was a globalist, a one world government guy with him at the top. America's founders didn't like a one world government guy telling us what to do. They broke away and flipped it and made the people the king. So America is an experiment of a polarity change in the flow of power. Instead of top down, it's bottom up. Instead of kings who ruled through fear, it's citizens who rule through virtue. That's one of the reasons finishing up a new book, but Romans 13, there's a confusion. People say, well, let everyone be subject to the governing authority, and there's no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. And it's like, okay, the authorities that founded America set it up so that we, the people, are in charge. A republic is where the word citizen means co-king. So Romans 13 is understood differently in a monarchy versus a republic. In a monarchy, subjects submit to the king. In a republic, the citizens are the king. Subjects obey, citizens give consent. right? And so in America, the citizen is the king, the politicians are the servants, the public servants. And so it's important for us to understand the responsibility that each of us has to be involved and to let our will be the one that is carried out in Washington, D.C.
Outstanding comments there. Are you at all, I was, and so I'll preface this question by saying I was a little amazed that Dawkins actually called himself culturally Christian. What are the alternatives as Christian values recede from our culture? Some of what you're just alluding to. What's the alternatives to our culture if it is not predominantly Christian in its foundation?
Yeah, some of the writers would say that we're living off the fumes of a more religious Christian past. In 1965, 93% of Americans identified themselves as Christian. 93% in 1965. There was 69% Protestant, 24% Catholic, and then there was about 3% Jewish. So a third of the world is Christian, and it's the largest religion in the world. The second is Islam, about a quarter of the world's population, and then about 16% unaffiliated, and then about 15% Hindu, 8% Buddhist, and it goes down to 0.1% Jewish. But Christianity is the largest religion in the world. One of the things I point out is America, Western civilization, Judeo-Christian civilization can be summed up in one word: individual. That you have a worth because you individually are made in the image of the Creator, and this Creator is not a respecter of persons. That's not so in the rest of the world. The rest of the world is group-based. In the Far East, they call it honor-shame culture. If the group honors you, your worth goes up. If the group shames you, your worth goes down. In Islam, they call it the ummah, the community. And if your daughter embarrasses you in front of your community, they'll murder their own daughter. And so in Hinduism, there's 4 major castes and multiple other variations, and the highest is the Brahmin. They're near divinity in the Hindu belief system. And the lowest is the Dalits, the untouchables. And if you're born as a Dalit, you have to clean the sewers and take out the trash. And no matter how good a job you do, you can never graduate in this life and move up the ladder. You're stuck. In China, they had the 100 family surnames, and they were the ruling class for centuries. And then you had these different cultures, right, where if you're a Muslim male, you're worth more. If you're a female, you're worth a little less. If you're an infidel, you're worth less. In America, it doesn't matter what religion, what sex, what ethnic background, you're equal because you're made in the image of the Creator. This is a Judeo-Christian concept. And so you have a worth as an individual, regardless of what group you belong to. In communist, atheistic, utilitarian cultures, your worth is dependent on your utility. If you can contribute to the state, you're worth more. If you can't, you're voted off the island. Well, in America, you're worth something whether you contribute or not, just by virtue of you being made in the image of the Creator. This gives the highest value to human life. And so when Richard Dawkins talks about preferring to live in a Christian culture, I think that is what he is referring to, that you're equal before the law, not based on if you're a CCP member or not. It's just the virtue that everyone's equal. So I think it's worth preserving Western civilization.
Absolutely. So in our short little time remaining, what would this country look like if, fill in the blank, LGBTQ values superseded Christian values? What fill in the blank there? What would our country turn into if these Christian values are replaced with something else?
Well, let's look at it. The typical form of government is gangs. And if we were to get rid of America, you would have the Russian gang, the Chinese gang, the Iranian Ayatollah gang, the North Korea. It's going to be a gang war on a global scale with the most modern weapons, and human rights are going to be crushed. And so America is more or less holding back the floodgates of this. If we depart from Judeo-Christian values, and what's the alternative is there's no right, there's no wrong. If there's no God, then there's no right and no wrong. And you tell the kids in school that, hey, whatever you feel like, today you can feel like a girl, tomorrow you can feel like a boy, then you can feel like a fuzzy. And these kids get pushed out of school and they have no borders, no guidelines. They just have their feelings of the day. And if they feel like somebody has something they want and they kill them, how can we get upset at them for doing what they've been trained to do? Once you remove internal morals, then the only alternative to keep law and order is to have more external restraints. It's a teeter-totter. The more internal restraints the populace has, the less external restraints they need.
Real quickly, where can people find out more about you and get some books?
Thank you, Jody. My website's AmericanMinute.com, AmericanMinute.com, and one of the recent books is Socialism, the Real History from Plato to the Present.
We got to wrap it up right there. Bill, thank you so much.